Hello there. I wanted to say a few words today about the abuser and sex under the safe relationship chaining umbrella, and just to have a little bit more awareness to having our safe relationship chaining toolbox, which is a set of skills that we have ready and waiting to enable us to keep our relationships and situations in our lives safe and secure. And I wanted to say a little bit about the abuser's potential attitude towards sex and the victim as time goes by, because as I've mentioned in the sex series, which I've just finished there, if you'd like to have a look at that, there's 30 videos in that series. As I mentioned there a number of times, sex is sometimes not something that is thought of by the victim as being a type of manipulation tool that can be used by an abuser, because very often we're socialized to connect love with sex and sex with affection and with caring, and we don't often think of it in terms of it being a tool that can be used in order to manipulate us and to keep us in line, whereas with some types of abusers it can be used either in a violent form or in terms of coercion, to keep the victim in line, to keep them under their thumb, to send the message that I'm in control here, and to use as a form of punishment sometimes as well, if the victim seems to be stepping out of line, stepping out of the status quo. Maybe she or he may be waking up to who the abuser actually is, and then in that instance what can happen is that sex can be used as a seduction tool in order to draw the victim back in, draw them away from their perception of the abuser as being an abuser, draw them back into the fairy tale and to convince them that everything is fine, because after all, if everything wasn't fine between us, we wouldn't have such an amazing sex life. And of course we know that isn't always the case, because sometimes an abuser and an abusive situation can be very severe, and yet there can be a very good sex life, which can be very, very confusing for the victim. But when we stand back and we have a logical mindset, we take a clear view of what's happening, and we put our emotions to the side, and we have a look at the perception of the person that we're involved with, who seems to be abusing us one minute and yet showing all this loving behaviour the next. Then we can see that it's often a part of the pattern, a part of the cycle, or a part of a pattern that's been set over a long period of time. And we may not have identified the pattern because A, we may not be aware that a pattern can be set up, and B, we may have been drawn into the dynamic so much, which may have been the purpose of the whole thing, that we've become lost down that rabbit hole, lost in the fantasy, lost in our perception and our own desires for what we want the relationship to be, that we may have lost sight of the dynamics that have been set up potentially by the other person. So it's quite interesting to look at the abusive dynamic objectively, and it's it's a good idea to do that even before we're in a relationship, because when we go into a relationship with conscious awareness, we're able to see things much more clearly if they do occur. We can identify behaviours and dynamics, and on a spiritual level, identify the intention of that other person much more quickly when we know about these types of dynamics that can be set up. And in that case, we're able to leave a lot more easily, because when we are aware of what types of dynamics that can be set up, then we cannot engage in the games, we cannot engage in the dynamic ourselves, and we can more easily withdraw slowly over time and in a safe manner, rather than having our consciousness tied up in the dynamics themselves. We can stand back and take a clear look, an objective look at what may be happening, regardless of our feelings for the other person, and regardless as well, importantly, of what that person may be saying. But rather, I found it useful anyway myself to actually look at things very, very objectively, as if I was an outsider, and then you get a clearer picture of the whole picture, rather than zooming in on one behaviour or certain words that the abuser has said. So I wanted to flag that up today as far as how sex can be used as a manipulation tool, either to draw us in line with the abusive dynamic, or to reward us for good behaviour, apparently, or to draw us back into the dynamic because we've become convinced yet again that, oh, everything is working now because we have such a brilliant sex life. So I wanted to put sex in terms of the abusive dynamic today, and just to get us to have that objectivity to have in our safe relationship toolbox for the future. So as always, stay safe and very happy. Bye bye.